It is my honor and privilege to welcome you all to the Indian Institute of Technology Madras for a truly momentous occasion, the inauguration of the Srilatha and Prabhakar Raghavan Center for Information and Society. We are gathered here in the presence of distinguished guests, esteemed faculty, dedicated students, and friends of IIT Madras, all united in a new chapter in the Institute's journey at the intersection of technology, data, and society. To commence this auspicious occasion, we begin with an invocation. I request all of you to kindly rise for the invocation.
நிலமடந்தை கெழிலொழுகும் சீராரும் மதனமென திகழ்வரத கண்டமிதில் எக்கணமும் அதில் சிறந்த திராவிடனல் திருநாடும் தக்க சிறு திரை முதலும் தரித்தனரும் திலகமுமே திலக வாசனை போல் அனைத்துலகும் இன்பமுற எத்திசையும் புகழ் மணக்க இருந்த பெரும் தமிழனங்கே தமிழனங்கே உன் சீரிழமை திறம் வியந்து செயல் மறந்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்து வாழ்த்துதுமே வாழ்த்துதுமே.
Thank you. Please be seated. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Kaviraj Nair, Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Institutional Advancement at IIT Madras, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Sharon. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to IIT Madras to the inauguration of the Srilatha and Prabhakar Raghavan Center for Information and Society. On behalf of the Office of Institutional Advancement, I extend a very warm welcome to all our distinguished guests this evening. We are especially honored to have with us Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan and Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan, whose vision and generosity have made this center possible. We are deeply grateful for their continued support and enduring connection with IIT Madras. Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan's career reflects a rare combination of intellectual depth and global impact. As one of the world's most respected computer scientists and technology leaders, he has helped shape the way billions of people discover and interact with information in the digital age. Just as importantly, his vision recognizes that the power of information and AI must be guided by thoughtful scholarship and a deep awareness of their societal consequences. This center is a reflection of that philosophy. I would also like to warmly welcome Professor Kamakoti, our director in absentia, Professor Ashwin Mahalingam, who is Dean Alumni and Corporate Relations, Mr. S. Krishnan, who is Secretary MIT, Professor Sendil Mullainathan, and I would also love to acknowledge Professor Ravindran and Professor Madanki, who will serve as the principal investigators of the center and will guide its intellectual direction. I would also like to welcome members of IIT Madras Alumni Charitable Trust, Mr. Shankar, who is the chairman, Mr. K.K. Raman, Mr. D. Chandrasekharan, and also our senior alumni like Mr. Santanam, other esteemed guests, Mr. Kasturi Venugopal, Mr. Anand Raghavan, and I can see a lot of Mr. Raju Venkatraman, sir. A lot of people who have walked in, all the well-wishers and guests who are present here, well-wishers of IIT Madras, a very warm welcome to all of you. Just a couple of words more on this center. The establishment of the center comes at an important moment as information and AI increasingly shape economies, institutions, and everyday life. It reflects IIT Madras' commitment to examining these transformations through rigorous interdisciplinary research that connects technology and society. The center will examine key questions around the ethics and authenticity of AI, the future of work in an information-driven economy, behavioral and cultural dimensions of technology, and the challenge of ensuring inclusive and equitable access to digital systems. Beyond research, the center will nurture talent through fellowships, postdoctoral programs, interdisciplinary coursework, and engagement with visiting scholars and global thought leaders. It will also serve as a global collaborative platform bringing together academia, industry, policymakers, and international experts. At IIT Madras, we believe that technological leadership must be accompanied by societal responsibility. This center embodies that philosophy, creating a space where technology, policy, and human values can be examined together. Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan and Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan, your generosity and vision have made this possible, and we are deeply grateful for that. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of you, and we are delighted to have all of you with us, and look forward to a great evening together. Thank you.
Thank you for those warm words of welcome, sir. It is my privilege to invite Professor Ashwin Mahalingam, Dean, Alumni and Corporate Relations, to address the gathering.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good to see so many of you here for the launch of this center. Hopefully, it wasn't only because of the high tea that was served. Okay, so we're really looking forward to have as many of you as possible be a part of and work with this center, and you'll, short while hear a little bit more about what this center is about and what it will do and so on. But first of all, Srilatha and Prabhakar, thank you very much for generously getting us going on this center. There are two types of centers that we start at IIT Madras. One, we have some ideas that we're already working on, and we go to alumni or corporates and say, can you support what we are doing? And in many cases, we're able to raise funding. But there's another kind of center which we co-create with people, where prima facie, we may not ourselves have had and had plans to move in that particular direction. But then upon having conversations, we realized that there is an area here of that merits inquiry that IIT Madras is best positioned to lead. And this is actually an example of the latter kind of center. So I met Prabhakar first, I think about a year and a half ago. I think I met Srilatha about a year ago. And when we started talking about this, we realized that there is this space that sort of adjacent to both computer science and data science on the one hand, but also to humanities and the social sciences on the other, which needs quite a lot of exploration and a lot of critical academic thought. We did, of course, first try to see if we could force fit this into one of our existing centers, but then we realized that this merited a life of its own. And over a period of time, we've sort of carefully thought through what the center should look like. We've actually, about a year ago, we even had a workshop, invited a number of people. Some of you are here today to brainstorm with us to try to understand what we would do and things like this. And over about a year and a half since we first had this conversation, we've come to this point where we are getting this center going that I think will make significant advances at this interstice of technology and the social sciences, and thereby do two things. I think one, it will allow IIT Madras hopefully to take upon a leadership role in this area globally. Hopefully there will be ideas coming out of this, technology coming out of this that can shape people's thinking across the world. But second, it also allows us to bring together a host of top-notch people from academia, from the corporate world, who will actually spend time at IIT Madras, helping us ideate on the kinds of things that we want to do with this center. One of them, of course, is Professor Sendil Mullainathan, who you'll be hearing from today. And hopefully, Sendil, we're going to be hearing from you virtually today, but we will hopefully have the opportunity of hosting you in person in the not so distant future. So we're very, very excited at IIT Madras to get this going. I think this is extremely new, extremely innovative, and something that could really have far-reaching impacts if we get it right. And we're counting on all of you who are in the room today to really help us pushing this forward in the right direction. So welcome again. Thank you again, Prabhakar and Srilatha. And hopefully we'll have a very interesting set of talks that tell us a little bit more about what the center will be up to. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ashwin. We are deeply honored to have with us this evening a distinguished leader in India's technology policy landscape. Joining us virtually, Mr. Krishnan IAS. Mr. Krishnan is the Secretary of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. His leadership is central to India's digital transformation, and his presence here today underscores the significance of what this center represents, not just for IIT Madras, but for the nation. I now warmly invite Mr. S. Krishnan to deliver the special address.
Present in person in Chennai, attending this event in this very familiar auditorium that I can see from here. Unfortunately, work keeps me in Delhi, and I hope you can hear me. Yeah, work keeps me here in Delhi, and I'm attending this important event remotely. First and foremost, I think I should thank both Ms. Srilatha and Mr. Prabhakar Raghavan for supporting such an institute here in IIT Madras. I recall a meeting that we had a little over a year ago here in Delhi, where broadly some of the ideas that Mr. Prabhakar Raghavan had about what he wanted to do with India and give back to what was happening in India is something that we discussed amongst a variety of other issues. And I'm extremely happy and gratified to see that these ideas have actually taken shape in the form of this particular center on information and society. I think this is something which is extremely critical in India today. I can honestly tell you that in many ways, the least interest, the kind of part of my work which seems to be least substantial but takes up most of my time and seems to bother people more than anything else is the way that information and society today interact in terms of how people use information that is available, how they interact and how they sort of multiply that information, what goes viral, who looks at what is true, what is fake, what is partly true, partly fake, how exactly it gets represented, how, for instance, various kinds of algorithms are used to boost the popularity of certain kinds of information and so on. And this leads to a number of key questions and important questions for society. It's at one level, somebody putting out something which is a misrepresentation and what amounts to a misrepresentation. And at another level, it is how it reflects more broadly on society and how traditional sources of information sometimes are getting less attractive in terms of what society needs, but their role continues to be very important. I saw in the audience some esteemed members of the Fourth Estate as well. The concern today many of them have is it is no longer a viable business to run a media business unless you fall into certain ways of purveying that information or certain ways of distributing that information or highlighting certain kinds of information. All of this is very concerning. At one level, there is a notion that citizens need to get more directly involved. There is a question of citizen journalism, people putting in information and disseminating it. At another level, nobody curates that information, so who takes responsibility for it? At a third level, you can manufacture all of this synthetically. So how do you use it? And quite frankly, my ministry is at the center of a lot of these debates and a lot of these concerns here in the government of India, and we are constantly assailed on this. We have amended and we have proposed amendments to the information technology rules a number of times. We are responding to changing circumstances. There are demands from certain quarters, including parliamentary standing committees and parliamentary committees, saying that we need more stringent laws on how this can be dealt with. At another level, there is a response which says that you need to be a little more guarded in this because you can't throw away the baby with the bathwater. You need innovation to really build up in this space, and you should not throttle innovation even before it is born. While at a third level, there is this whole question of freedom of expression and at what level do freedoms work. But if we are talking about freedom of expression, whose expression becomes an important element? Are bots going to dominate how information is disseminated, how it is made more popular, how it is made more viral? So all of these are very, very key questions, and we've come across a number of these issues in terms of electoral democracy being affected by the way information gets purveyed and the way that information gets shared. These have been concerns in democracies other than India as well. It's been a concern in the United States itself. It's been a concern in the United Kingdom. Many countries in Europe are discussing these issues. Australia is discussing this issue. Canada is discussing this issue. Practically across the world, these have become important elements. And oftentimes, some of these debates are not truly deeply academic enough. Some of them are informed by maybe a partial understanding of issues, not a very deep dive understanding, not with broader consultation, with a limited focus. Those of us who are in government understand the pressure of making a decision quickly on some of these issues. And what would really help us in making these decisions more effectively is more evidence being harnessed, more evidence being marshaled to put together an appropriate way in which we can make some of these key decisions. And that is where I think this particular center is going to be extremely important for the same reasons that Professor Ashwin pointed out, that we would get some of the best minds, some of the best scholars coming in, contributing on an interdisciplinary basis, contributing from across different areas of learning. is something which is very essential and important. So on the one hand, there is a complete technology-oriented understanding of this and what technology can do with it. On the other hand, there is the importance of having humans in the loop. And interestingly enough, IIT Madras has been at the forefront of many of these issues. Government of India, volunteered IIT Madras, if I can put it that way, to be our lead institution for the network of institutions of excellence in the area of artificial intelligence for the United Nations. So leading that network, Professor Ravindran is on stage and he is leading that effort. So we've associated them there. And a range of other initiatives similarly have been taken with IIT Madras and various other centers within it. And the other thing that IIT Madras has displayed has been this willingness to be interdisciplinary in their approach in terms of pooling in people from multiple faculties and departments to contribute to a particular area of interest. So I, for one, very keenly look forward to what exactly this center will bring out in the days to come, how exactly it would support a range of debates, discussions we need to have in a broader society about crucial issues which relate to our governance, which relate to how we govern ourselves, how the society itself evolves, and what we need to do in societal interest, and how we need to use technology in the way that works for society best. So I think this is going to be a very, very important center from the way I look at it. And the support of both Srilatha and Prabhakar is extremely important for this reason. And I'm very, very proud, and I should thank Professor Ashwin again for having thought of me. He thinks of me once in a while for problematic issues that he runs into. And I guess he thought of me again when this came up. But thank you very much and for having me on this. It's really a privilege and an honor. And very, very relevant in my present job, and very, very relevant to the kind of work that we're doing here in the Government of India. And I wish this particular center all success. We are starting on the 6th of April, and we should see that, in the way that things work out in the technology space. A week is a long time. A couple of weeks is a very long time. Things change very rapidly. And so I guess we also need to move very fast in terms of what we need to do in the center. Thank you once again for having me here on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan, for the insightful remarks, and thank you for joining us online today. Before we proceed with the inauguration, it is only right that we understand the vision, scope, and promise of the center that we are gathered here to launch. We are privileged to hear from two of its founding architects. First, I invite Dr. Matangi Krishnamurthy, Associate Professor of Anthropology in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, and Chairperson of the Archive of IIT Madras, to share insights into the Center for Information and Society.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. In response to Ashwin's earlier question as to whether people are here just for high tea, Ashwin, I'm very glad to tell you that some people are also here for the 5 extra marks I've promised them for Introduction to Cultural Anthropology. For whatever reason, though, I'm very glad to be in the same room as all of you, and I could not be more delighted to be one of the community of people steering the work and journey of the Center for Information and Society. And I thank Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan, Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan for their largesse and vision. I will be one of many people thanking them as the evening progresses, and you will see why over the next few minutes. My 5 minutes today are meant to provide an overview of our planned activities, our vision, our dreams, etc., which I will. But as a card-carrying social scientist claiming to know and work with people, I will also attempt to tell you why you should care. But first things first. Our vision for the center is ambitious. We want to strive to be the premier center for understanding and thought leadership on the impact of information on society through research, teaching, and solutions for societal development. Our planned activities and goals are therefore to bring together work, of course, at the cusp of information and society, but also, as Mr. Krishnan pointed out, to answer fundamental questions around how information is changing the nature of economic and social activity in contemporary contexts. We will also, as specified earlier, attempt to identify guidelines, policies, structural and institutional guardrails for effective governance in these circumstances. In keeping with these goals, our planned activities and verticals are geared towards research, training, teaching, and outreach, and we hope to be, for the community of IIT Madras in particular, but also a much larger community in India and abroad, a center invested in both engaging with, but also leading the current moment. In other words, watch this space for on the cards beginning this month are calls for project proposals, announcements of training programs, and a lecture series featuring preeminent speakers, artists, writers, scientists, academics. I guarantee you that no matter your vantage point, there is something here for each of you. As I was writing my notes for the launch over the weekend, I thought long and hard about why I am so energized by the idea of the Center for Information and Society. Now, a very obvious reason could well be my academic magpie complex. Ooh, shiny, new project. Let's abandon all my existing anthropological problems, unwritten papers on my desk runneth over, in the service of a whole new set of problems. But the actual reason is something that you can perhaps relate to, which is I, like so many of you in this room, came of age in the information age. I research call centers and gig work, write about influencer economies, and I'm deeply invested in questions of artificial intelligence and forms of work. My family WhatsApp group consists in equal measure of news, fake news, memes, blessings, good morning flowers, and reels of preternaturally sentient animals of various persuasions. I agonize all the time about the tech detox I intend to practice on weekends. Note to self, try again. And every day, I resist the temptation to let some combination of ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude write lecture notes that my students may actually listen to. I wonder as to who or what is writing my student assignments, even as I'm aware as to the possibilities of the democratization of the playing field for learners from all backgrounds in this age of AI. I'm constantly overwhelmed by information. I'm consistently underinformed. In other words, I am like you of a time where, to paraphrase Nietzsche, anything is possible and nothing is possible. Which is why I'm excited about how the Center for Information and Society will be predicated on this very important business of staying with the trouble. What does this mean? What does it involve? It involves composing problems that are meant to speak to how people live, care, love, hope, and grieve in this information age. It means resisting both hubris and cynicism. It means seeking possibility without shying away from critique. It means asking what it means to be human while also challenging and upending its very worried exceptionalism. It involves imagining information and technology as produced by and producing the human in all its glories, vulnerabilities, and fallacies. As one of my favorite quotes from the Swiss novelist Max Frisch goes, "We asked for workers, but humans came." I see the Srilatha and Prabhakar Raghavan Center for Information and Society as an ongoing exercise in one of the hardest jobs of all, asking the right questions. And asking the right questions in a way that does not separate or hierarchize the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. How do we address the problems that plague our times? Loneliness, anxiety, alienation, polarization, exclusion, resource management, climate change, war, violence, anomie, with all the resources at our disposal. How do we provide for our most important stakeholders, our young people, inspiration, imagination, direction, and the scaffolding within which they can do the work of imagining and creating a world different and better than this one? This is our work, and it means the world to us if we could count on all of you to join us. Thank you again for being here. I now hand over the baton to my co-conspirator, academic, scientist, and educator extraordinaire, Professor Ravindran.
Good evening, everyone. And so you're going to see a stark contrast in, the two different scientific disciplines. So she was very well prepared with typed out notes and things like that, and I'm here just ad-libbing. We did a great job splitting the work between us. She did all the hard work of setting up what the center is going to do and things like this. I'm just here to, say a few things. But first off, thank you, Srilatha and Prabhakar, for this amazing vision and wanting to do it with IIT Madras. Of course, you are alum, but still, you have to come back to us for with more motivation than just having been an alum. And I hope that is the case, and we will make sure we will live up to that expectation we have from ITM. So one thing, I don't know how many of you noticed, when Kaviraj introduced the people on the stage, he welcomed everybody else, but he just acknowledge the fact that Matangi and I were on the stage. That's because, not that we are not welcome, but we are not here as visitors, and we are here to do the actual hard job. So thank you for pointing that out, Kaviraj. I'll just share a few thoughts about why I am so excited about this. So as you know, I work in AI mostly. So some of the things that we are seeing now with a broader adoption of AI are a little worrisome. So this is one issue that I have been pointing out in several fora, is this emergence of a behavior called psychopathy, right? So AI tends to agree with you most of the time, in fact. So, in fact, there was all these jokes in the early days when the AI tends to disagree with you. All you need to do is tell ChatGPT, hey, but my wife said this is the right answer. And then it comes back and says, yeah, now I see why it's the right answer. Of course, I agree with you, right? But now, no, that was a joke. Now it's become a reality, in fact. You don't have to even quote your wife. Okay, you have to say, no, I do strongly believe this is the right way to do it. And then it tends to agree with you. There was a recent study that actually showed that when people have been rude in certain online interactions, right, they are less likely to be apologetic about it afterward if they have had a chance to converse with an AI agent about their behavior before being questioned. That's because the AI agent actually says, no, what you said was right. That guy deserved to be abused. It kind of, this is something that kind of reinforces that behavior. So why is this troubling for me? This is not something that we anticipated when we trained these, frontier models, this really deep generative models and things like that. So we were expecting them to solve all kinds of math problems and solve the problems of the world. We never anticipated this kind of emergent behavior that tended to agree with, what the person was talking to them about, right? That's one part of it. The second part, there are significant dangerous implications of this. There have been instances where people who were, emotionally challenged, spoke to these AI models and were then encouraged to, take drastic steps, right? Because it kind of reinforced their depression, So these were not behaviors that we expected, neither from the AI nor from the humans, in some sense. The levels of the belief or levels of acceptance of what the AI is telling you goes up when it tends to reinforce your primary beliefs, right? I mean, of course, I'm pretty sure people are going to put their hand up. Of course, the psychologists knew about this. That's exactly the point. The technologists didn't anticipate this. So if we had had a broader conversation, we probably would have anticipated this and probably would have done something different, right? There's another troubling aspect to this. This was not just ChatGPT. This is not just Gemini. It is not just Claude. Almost all of these large language models seem to have converged to some kind of a psychopathic behavior. Why is that happening? What is there about this whole training process? What is there about the way we choose the incentives for these models to learn? What is there about this fine-tuning that is causing this to happen? This is not a question as a technologist alone that we would have even thought of to begin with, but now, looking at the broader impact of what is happening, right? This is something that we need to come back to. So, and this is not just about AI. The broader impact of technology on society, the information, access to information on society is not something that we have studied. So I started looking at one phenomenon which is known, for Matangi can verify that this is very well known to the anthropologists and people who have been studying impact of technology on society. But I started looking at it when people started asking me questions about, hey, you keep saying AI is going to create new jobs. Right? What kind of jobs are they going to create? Right? So one thing that somebody pointed me to was the advent of these rural influencers with the prevalence of TikTok. TikTok as a platform, by the way that it was doing its recommendations of these videos and things like that, allowed a whole new class of rural influencers who are actually starting to make very good livelihood by making TikTok shorts. Right? This was not something that people would have anticipated when TikTok as a short video sharing platform was introduced, right? Especially in India, right? So how people took to it and how it was so much easier to create content in local language and consume content in local language. More importantly, find content in local language for you to consume, and that created this whole class of rural, not just influencers but entrepreneurs, people who are actually making a livelihood out of this. But then the government pulled the plug on TikTok. So what happened to all these people that we enabled? Did a substitute platform come in? Right? Where did their creative energy, their entrepreneurial spirit, where did it go to? Right? So we don't have a good answer to that. In fact, I actually looked at what platforms took the place of TikTok, and there were a couple of failed attempts, but nothing has really captured that. And it actually seems that the people who had become entrepreneurs, who are making money out of TikTok, have gone back to their old way of living because they have not been able to find a suitable substitute for what was happening. Even though the other, like YouTube has its short messaging platform and things like that, it's not as efficient as surfacing content and being enabling a livelihood, right, as TikTok was, for whatever reason. So again, there is this this marriage of technology and its impact on society that's throwing up a lot of interesting questions for us to study, right? And it's not just AI, right? So of course, the impact of TikTok was on partly due to its recommendation algorithm, which was built on AI. But otherwise, the ready-made access to information and the ease with which you could put things on, just the whole the impact of this information on society has been tremendous. And we are far away from understanding all of this. And we have a lot of people. We have a very, very large society on which we can do all of these studies and experiments, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. And I'm very happy that we are starting the center so that there can be more focus on issues like this. So, and once again, thank you for showing up and staying back even after the tea got over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matangi and Professor Ravindran. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we arrive at the moment that brings us all together this evening. It is a privilege to witness the birth of an institution, to be present at the moment when a vision becomes a reality, when an idea is given a home, a name, and a purpose. The Srilatha and Prabhakar Raghavan Center for Information and Society at IIT Madras is exactly such a moment. I now request Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan and Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan, along with Professor Ashwin, Mr. Kaviraj, Professor Ravindran, and Dr. Matangi to please come forward for the plaque unveiling. Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan and Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan, on behalf of the entire IIT Madras family, we thank you from the bottom of your hearts. Your generosity and vision will inspire generations of scholars, researchers, and change makers. We are now honored to hear from Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan, whose life's work is a testament to the power of combining intellectual curiosity with real-world impact. Dr. Raghavan is a chief technologist at Google, where he has held several senior roles since joining in 2012, including Senior Vice President with oversight of search, maps, advertising, Gemini, and payments, and before that, responsibility for Gmail, Google Drive, Calendar, and Google Docs. Previously, he led Yahoo Labs and served as CTO at Verity, following over a decade at IBM Research. He co-authored the textbooks Randomized Algorithms and Introduction to Information Retrieval. Dr. Raghavan received a PhD from Berkeley and doctorate at honorum from the University of Bologna and is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. To hear him speak at the inauguration of a center that bears his name here at the institution where his own journey began is a moment of profound meaning. I now warmly invite Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan to deliver the keynote address.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. If you're standing in the back without a place to sit, there's some seats in the front. You can come on up. We promise not to bite. So thank you all for being here. Director Professor Kamkoti, who I believe is virtual with us, Dean Ashwin Mahalingam, Secretary Krishnan, Professor Mulanathan, and Ravindran Matangi. You're not supposed to be thanked, so I'll just acknowledge your presence in Kaviraj. Not yet. Yeah, when you do your work. And distinguished guests, thank you for joining us today to inaugurate the new center. And above all, thanks to IIT Madras and its leadership for its timely and we expect consequential decision to create the center. I've always believed the role of a great educational institution is not to teach answers, but to teach us to ask the right questions. And Matangi stole that line from me before I came on here. And just to illustrate this, I want to give you an example. So no less an illustrious forum than the British medical journal Lancet asked in an 1830 article titled, "Can the human frame survive motion at 20 miles per hour?" And then there's a scholarly treatment of how humans who go at 20 miles per hour experience neurological damage. So you've been warned. Well, maybe it's too late for you all. Right? So, but my point is, as humans, we persist in myopic biases that lead us more often to addressing the question that's right before us instead of the question that we ought to be asking. In this spirit of thoughtful inquiry, Srilatha and I want to set the stage for this new center. I'm now going to read you some editorial headlines. A view of the future, machines for everything and men for nothing. On the impossibility of competing with a power that requires neither sleep nor soul. Sound familiar? I see a few people nodding. Well, if you nodded, you're really, really old because these headlines are from the year 1830. And yet, they read like today's. And that's what, to the remarks Ravindran was making, should pique your interest here. Right? So I want to continue to dwell on this era for a moment, so bear with me. I'll spend a moment on Thomas Carlyle's classic essay, Signs of the Times, which is really the definitive discourse, I'd say, on the Industrial Revolution. But his words ring just as true today. So Carlyle begins by saying, were we required to characterize this age of ours by any single epithet, we should be tempted to call it not an heroical, devotional, philosophical, moral age, but above all others, the mechanical age. Our old modes of exertion are all discredited and thrown aside. It's a bit of a lament. But then he continues in a cautiously upbeat manner, and that's what I want us to think hard about, right? So he goes on to say, what wonderful accessions have been thus made and are still making, how much better fed and clothed, lodged, and in all outward respects, accommodated men now are, is a grateful reflection. What changes too, this addition of power is introducing into the social system, how wealth is more and more increased, and at the same time, gathered itself more and more into the masses, will be a question for political economists, and a much more complex and important one than any they have yet engaged with. Okay? And now you start to see the connection to the things you heard from Matangi and Ravindran. Right? So, as you hear me recite Carlyle, your instinct in this moment might be to reinterpret his arguments in the light of AI. But I submit that the right backdrop is not AI, but the information revolution, just as Carlyle's backdrop was not the steam engine, but the Industrial Revolution. The great Indian reformists, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Swami Vivekananda, contemporaneous to Carlyle, argued for a society where technology enhanced the human condition rather than replacing it. It is in this spirit that we envision a new discipline at the nexus of information technology, which is the supply side of this revolution, and society, and therefore the social sciences, which is the demand side of this equation. Right? So this revolution is fueled by information technology and consumed by the social sciences. Because we are firm in our conviction and optimism that there is demand, that these technologies aren't just being created in a vacuum with no demand. Now, we believe that information is empowerment and development. And if you juxtapose this with Amartya Sen's argument that development is freedom, then you can see the pipeline from information to development to freedom. And that is a noble cause that behooves us to study. Okay? Because better information access should lead to improved outcomes for all of society. And as with the Industrial Revolution, we view the information revolution as propelling us to more opportunity for more people, especially the underserved. But as always, this hinges on the right scholars asking the right questions. What questions might these be? It's far from my place to advise the leaders, the academic leaders, on what questions they should be studying. They know best. But in my 15 or so years, leading some of the most influential information products that we've seen, the kinds of questions that would occur to me routinely were things like, how does the economic trajectory of a village change once it's been connected up to more information access? How is the democratic ideal and process impacted by free information? How is the relativism of truth adjudicated by a society empowered with information? And these are all questions that were through lines in Secretary Krishnan's remarks earlier, and also the remarks of Professors Krishnamurthy and Ravindran. Now, lofty questions like these begin their lives at a philosophical and rhetorical level, but they must then be distilled down all the way down to very concrete questions for an undergraduate who's doing a bachelor's thesis to be able to study, with a through line all the way to policy, the way Mr. Krishnan was envisioning. Okay. Projects like these will ultimately yield critical outcomes that have an even more critical impact on society, in keeping with IIT Madras' well-deserved reputation for building solutions that work and that matter. I want to end by expressing the hope that this new center will not simply make IIT Madras a player in this emerging discipline, but a world leader that shapes this emergence. On behalf of Srilatha and myself, thank you, and we wish IIT Madras, the new center, and most importantly, its students, scholars, and teachers, the very best in blazing this trail forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raghavan. We will now proceed to the felicitation of our esteemed dignitaries. I now request Mr. Kaviraj to felicitate Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan with a bouquet.
In the front. Can you come in front so that it will be clear for the photo? projector is. Sorry.
I now request Professor Ashwin to felicitate Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan with an Angavastram. I also request Professor Ashwin to felicitate Dr. Prabhakar and Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan with a memento. I also request Professor Ravindran, Mr. Kaviraj, and Professor Matangi to join for the photograph, please. Thank you, everyone. We regret that Professor V. Kamakoti is unable to join us virtually today this evening as he is engaged in a meeting at the ministry. However, he conveys his best wishes for the success of this important initiative at IIT Madras. And now, we arrive at the intellectual highlight of the evening, the distinguished lecture. It is a privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker. Professor Senthil Mullainathan is an MIT professor with dual appointments in economics and EECS, reflecting research that bridges behavioral economics and computer science. A recipient of the MacArthur Genius Award and the Infosys Prize, he co-authored the acclaimed book Scarcity, exploring how resource deprivation impairs cognition. Beyond his academic work, he co-founded the Applied Behavioral Science nonprofit Ideas 42 and the AI healthcare company Dandelion. His current research focuses on building algorithms to enhance human capabilities, creating bicycles of the mind. We are truly privileged to have him join us virtually and share his ideas with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to Professor Senthil Mullainathan.
Thank you for having me. Can you all hear me? Yes, perfect. Okay. I'm sorry I can't be there with you. Especially sorry as it would have been a chance to have some good dosa in Italy. Let me dive in. I'm going to do a screen share here and go. Okay, perfect. So I want to start with a story that many of you may have heard. It's a short story by Sherlock Holmes called Silver Blaze. There's a scene in that story that's very often quoted where Watson says, "Hey, is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention?" And Holmes says, "Yes, to the curious incident of the dog in nighttime." And Watson says, "Wait, the dog did nothing at night." And Holmes says, "That's exactly the curious incident." This has been often referred to as the dog that didn't bark. And the most informative things in life are often the things that didn't happen or something that's missing. I'm telling this old story again because there's something noteworthy in the title of this center. When Prabhakar started talking to me about his idea for the center, I just could not shake this thing that is missing from this title. In 2026, the curious incident for me for this is the dogs that didn't bark here. There's no word artificial intelligence in this title. There's no words machine learning in this title. There isn't even the word computing in this title. Now, Prabhakar obviously knows these things, and it is extremely curious to leave them out of this very important center title. And why are they left out? Why leave out the most transformative technologies in the last 2 decades? To make sense of this, I want to go to a puzzle that from the world of cognitive psychology. So, in this story, it's actually from medicine. Imagine that you have a way to treat a tumor, which involves sending radiation in. And it's effective. The radiation goes in, it hits the tumor, and it kills the tumor depending on the dose of the radiation. There's just one problem with this, which is as you raise the dosage, you're killing the tumor, but you're also killing the healthy tissue as the radiation goes through to hit the tumor. So now you have kind of a problem. What should you do? Well, there's an obvious answer. Find the highest dose that doesn't damage the healthy tissue too much. Maybe like maybe somewhere here. And hope for the best. Now, I'm giving this example because there's actually a much better answer to this problem, a noticeably better answer than this. And you have all the ingredients that come up with this better answer. If you want a clue, suppose I give you a different problem. You have a bunch of soldiers that are trying to storm a castle. And as they try to enter the castle, there's only so many soldiers that can make it into one door. Maybe that gives you the answer, or at least helps you think of the right answer. Of course, when you think of it as a castle, you're like, well, are there other doors? Once you realize there are other doors, you realize over here, there's also another solution. The solution is hit the tumor from many different angles. Psychologists have used this problem and other problems like it to emphasize something very important about the way the mind works. It was very hard to notice this other, now obvious solution because we didn't have the right mental model. And mental models of problems matter a lot. The words we use, the way we think about things, the analogies we bring to a problem matter a lot. So calling this center a Center for Information Society is not just a title, it's an implicit assertion about what is the right mental model for computing technology in the 21st century. And there is a bold claim here, if you think about it, that the right mental model, in fact, focuses away from, say, artificial intelligence and focuses on information in society. And in my talk, I'm going to do just a little piece of what is the right mental model. I'm going to focus on simply contrasting two mental models of AI as a way of illustrating this point that with the wrong mental model, we can end up doing the very wrong things. And that will serve as a small piece to make sense of this bigger point about why information is the right way to think about things. So let me talk about these two mental models. We've heard a lot of talk of LLMs. We've heard a lot of talk of AI. How do we think about, say, Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT? Well, I would argue that the primary way we think about it is something like AI is something that can do things that the smartest people can do, or in its most aspirational phrase, AI is the thing that does what people can do. Let me try to illustrate what this is and this mental model and the contrasting mental model using a very tangible example. I don't know how many of you know what this is. Hopefully all of you have seen this. This is The Wizard of Oz, quite a famous movie. Now, one way to think about The Wizard of Oz, which before it was a movie, was a book, one way to think about what AI can do with relation to The Wizard of Oz is to say, go to something like Gemini and ask, what is The Wizard of Oz all about? Please keep it short and simple. I can't really be bothered to read things. This is my prompt. And it came back with an answer. Transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets and then teams up with 3 strangers to kill it. Well, no, that is not actually what it came up with. It would have been very funny if it had come up with that. That would have been the most accurate, realistic description of the movie. Instead, it came up with, swept away to magical Oz by a tornado, Dorothy and her dog Toto journey with new friends to find the wizard and return safely home. So this is pretty impressive. The model has given me a good summary. But there's a different thing the model could have done. And to illustrate that with The Wizard of Oz, I want to illustrate this other mental model. As I said, The Wizard of Oz was a book, but it wasn't just one book. It was actually a second book, The Marvelous Land of Oz, a third, fourth, fifth. There are actually 30 books in The Wizard of Oz. And one of the books in The Wizard of Oz is particularly interesting to me. It's the 15th book, The Royal Book of Oz. Like many books, I primarily know the cover. And this book, perhaps the most interesting thing, is in fact seen in the cover, because this is one of the covers of the book. I say one of the covers because this is another cover of the book. You can go buy this book with either of these covers, and you'll notice there's something strikingly different between these two covers. Even though the actual picture is the same, the author is different. In one, the author is claimed to be Frank Baum, and in the other, it is Ruth Plumley Thompson. How can a book have two very different authors? That's because the 15th book of Oz represents an oddity. There are 30 books. Frank Baum, when he was writing the books, writing the 15th book, he knew he was dying. So he appointed Ruth Plumley Thompson to take over. She took over. After his death, she wrote books 16 through 30. But book 15 was a sort of vague handover period. Nobody knows who wrote book 15. In fact, in the small group of academic scholars who care about these things, this is considered somewhat of a literary mystery. They have read both books carefully, they see the text, they know how Baum writes, they know how Plumley Thompson writes, and they cannot agree. They fight vigorously about this issue. And into that fight came Jose Bonango. This is one of my favorite papers. He wrote this paper on who wrote the 15th book of Oz. In fact, I love the sort of the subtitle. Does only the Oz himself know who wrote the Royal Book of Oz? And I'm going to tell this story with a little bit of an own rendition of this paper, a little bit of literary license. So it's not exactly the paper, but the results are exactly the same. I'm going to tell it in a slightly more fun way. So here's roughly what Bonango did. He built an algorithm that he taught to identify Baum and Thompson. How did he do that? Well, we have 29 books we know who wrote them. So for the 29 books with the known authors, he took 5,000 word excerpts. And he trained an algorithm to say, well, these were from Baum, these were from Thompson. And he held out a bunch of excerpts that the algorithm never saw. And you train an algorithm like this, and it gets pretty good. And you ask it to predict, well, here's a new piece you haven't seen. Who wrote it, Baum or Thompson? And we can evaluate how well the algorithm does. Now, this is an impressive result that he finds. So here's what happens. If you take each of the other books, the other 29 books, and you give it pieces the algorithm has never seen, it nails it. It says, for sure, these are Baum, and for sure, these are Thompson. It is literally an AUC of 1, which is, in my experience, extremely impressive. You rarely see this. This is not overfitting. This is just the model is extremely good at seeing what Baum's style is and what Thompson's style is. Which raises the interesting question, what if we gave it book 15? Remember, this is the book that people can't agree on. Well, let's have a look. When you give it book 15, here's what the algorithm says about the dispute, the probabilities it places on each chapter. Let's go chapter by chapter. It says, well, until chapter 12, I'm very certain it was Baum. At chapter 13, it is Thompson, for sure. Astonishingly, it sees the exact moment when Baum dies, hands off, and says, you write the rest. And to me, this is astonishing that an algorithm can see something in data that experts couldn't see. And in fact, I find it most surprising because it's not just seeing something in astrophysical data. This is seeing something in data that is the most human of all data, language. It is able to pick up telltale signs of what Baum's style is and what Thompson's style is that people couldn't notice. So if we take one view of AI to be doing algorithms that do what the smartest people can, a different view of AI is algorithms that do what even the smartest people cannot. Now, lest you think I am saying algorithms that can do everything people can and then more, that is not what I am saying. I'm simply saying algorithms that do things people cannot. To illustrate that, let me go to what I think is the most famous example of this second view. AlphaFold. Protein folding is a very hard problem, and scientists struggled to predict the structure of a protein. It is important, hard, and AlphaFold was a major breakthrough. It was a major breakthrough because it very successfully predicted the structure of a protein from just the folded structure of a protein from just the sequence. So I'm going to use AlphaFold as an illustrative thing of the second mental model. And I'm going to show you how these two models of AIs narrowly give you very different perspectives on the future, on capabilities, on how they should be built. So as I said, the biggest difference, of course, is in capabilities. On the left, it does what people do. On the right, it does what people cannot. But of course, it also implies the opposite. You can go to Gemini and ask it to explain what an amino acid is. You can go to Gemini and say, do my biology homework, and maybe some of you have. But you can't go to AlphaFold and say, explain what an amino acid is. That is not anywhere in the capability set. It cannot do your biology homework. All it can do is predict the folded structure of a protein. Notice the vast difference here. On the left, yes, it can do what people can do. On the right, yes, it can do what people cannot, but there's no aspiration that we are trying to get it to also do this other thing. It's a very different activity. It's an activity where you are building an algorithm for a purpose that eludes human capability, and that is it. I'll give another way. And as a result, on the right, it need not do what people can do. You've all heard, and I just pulled this off the internet, you've all heard of scaling laws. And this is the idea that as we put more and more compute, more and more data, we end up with models that can do well on these benchmarks, in this case, MMLU. Scaling laws are an illustration of the left, where you are putting more and more resources into getting closer and closer to emulating something people can do. I see scaling laws slightly differently. I see that the vast majority of effort is going into the last little bit of emulating human capability. Most resources, as a result, are going out to squeezing the last bit. And of course, the idea that we're going to get there is, some people can dispute, is this even the last bit? So on the right, we don't have to put in those resources. As a result, these models also differ in how they are built. Notice on the left, to emulate human capabilities, the training data is the corpus of biology knowledge, all the textbooks we have, all the papers we have. On the right, we're not training on the corpus of biology knowledge. What are we training on? We're training on carefully created experimental data that says this protein has this structure. Interestingly, this data is not our knowledge. It's actually something different. On the left, these are our expert judgments. On the right is nature's judgment. It's actually what happens. Or put differently, on the left, we train on our knowledge. On the right, we train on our ignorance. You've seen this in AlphaFold. You saw it in The Wizard of Oz. We built algorithms by identifying things we didn't know. Who wrote this book? And training an algorithm to help us answer that question. How does this protein fold? It's a fundamentally different way to even train these models. And as a result, you'll see that many important problems in the world can be handled in this AlphaFold way. And our intuitions are usually to handle them in this automation way. And let me give some illustrations from 3 different things: medicine, criminal justice, and education. So let's start with medicine. So there's a phenomena called sudden cardiac death, which is extremely common well, I should say, it's common for what it is. People roughly my age suddenly one day die of their heart stops beating. It's somewhat of a medical mystery because if you go back and look at the EKGs of people for whom this happened, for almost all of them, there is nothing wrong in the EKG. You look at it and go, I don't know why the heart stopped working. It seemed fine. So there's a few people for whom we can find something. So one way to train an algorithm is what we often do. Get a bunch of EKGs, train it on what cardiologists would say, and now we can apply at scale everywhere, look for the 10% of cases where we know there's an anomaly and do something about it. What would we do? Well, it turns out what makes sudden cardiac death a medical mystery that's quite tragic is that it has a very easy solution. If you knew somebody had even a 5%, 4% chance of this, you would simply install a pacemaker. And that's it. When the heart stops, the pacemaker restarts it. So one approach is train an algorithm to find those things that a cardiologist would do. But there's another approach. This is more the Wizard of Oz AlphaFold approach, which is to say, what if we just train an algorithm not on what a cardiologist would say, not to emulate our current understanding, but just to say, hey, these 90% of people, we have no idea. We look at the EKG, they look fine. Why not train the algorithm to see if it finds something? And that's the two different approaches. In the second approach, the algorithm has a chance to discover things that medicine doesn't have. And we did this in one body of work where instead of training on expert judgment, you train on actual ground truth. When you do that, here's a figure from this paper, which I'll walk you through. What it actually does, it is able to consistently find signal. It is able to find EKGs that cardiologists say look perfectly normal, telltale signs that this person is going to have, and in fact did, because this is historical data, sudden cardiac arrest and die. And it identifies at a pretty high rate patients who are going on to die. And in fact, at preferred clinical risk thresholds, it finds quite a few patients who could have been given a pacemaker at the levels at which we currently give. In other words, this algorithm could easily save quite a few lives, and it can even advance science. You can now have the algorithm using various techniques start to explicate what is it seeing in the EKG. And here I put up an example of one of the things it notices, which is it's very hard for the human mind looking at a single EKG to notice overall amplitude changes where everything changes in amplitude. That is, there's no single feature. There's simply a big amplitude change. Another thing, which is in the second figure, is very subtle changes in the second derivative. That is just a lot more noisiness everywhere, not in any one place. These are hard to notice features, but once you're told to look for them, you can start looking for them. More importantly, once you know this is what's happening, you can go back and ask, what does this tell us about what's going wrong in the heart? So that's an example of how these two approaches could be quite different. Let me give you another example from the world of criminal justice. Every year in the United States, there's about 12 million people who are arrested, which is an astonishing number. And right after arrest, there's a decision of where should the defendant wait for trial. Now notice this is not a question of, is the defendant guilty? It's just a question of, while waiting for trial, where should the defendant be? So the first thing you could do, which is very often what people do, is they say, oh, well, maybe we could train an algorithm to do what the judge does. But as we've seen by now, that's a bit of a mistake. Instead, why not ask, what is the judge supposed to be doing when they're deciding who to release and who to send home to wait for trial versus waiting for trial in jail? Well, they're predicting the person's flight risk or public safety risk. So what if we built an algorithm to actually predict that risk? It turns out that you find that in this consequential hard decision, judges are very far from the optimum. What I mean by that is if you predict who's high risk, you find by simply reordering people, you can keep jail populations fixed and reduce crime by 24%, or perhaps more strikingly, you can achieve the same crime rates by reducing jail populations by 40%. This is at saving dollars, keeping crime safe, and releasing 40% of the people who did not deserve to be in jail. You could close these jails in July. And all this can be done while reducing racial disparities. Now, I'm not saying we should automate. I'm simply just pointing out this approach tells us, much like biologists, judges are also experts who could use a lot of help because it is hard to find patterns in data. Interestingly, the model, as we saw with the case of heart attack, also gives us some insight as to why judges are getting things wrong. If we turn the camera on the judge, and instead of predicting the risk of defendants, we predict what the judge will do, we can start to learn what is driving these decisions that are ultimately unrelated to risk. And it turns out a big set of factors that predict the judge's decision have to do with the current charge. It appears that judges overweight what the current charge is, and Cass Sunstein, the legal scholar, based on these results, it has a notion, they introduce a notion called current charge bias, that judges disproportionately look at whatever the current charge is and not the person's history and circumstances. But the most important factor is not any of these current charges. In fact, it's a factor that explains about 50% of what the judge does, and it is the mugshot. It is the person's face. The face alone is responsible for about half of what the judge will do. That is striking, and it tells you there is something weird going on. In fact, you can go further, as we did with the heart condition, and ask what in the face. And what you find is you can see it in these two mugshots. These are synthetic mugshots that I've morphed. One feature that explains about 8% of what the judge will do is whether the person is well-groomed. In other words, are they shaved and have a clean haircut? The second feature is seeable in these photos and is more subtle. Well-groomed, at least, you can be like, I guess that makes sense. The second feature is fat-faced. The fatter your face, actually, in this one, it's interesting. It's not even obvious what the sign would be. And it turns out that fat face is extremely predictive and has a positive sign. The fatter your face, the more likely you are to be released. And not only are these important and explain a big fraction of what judges do sense, the magnitudes are huge. The effect of either being well-groomed or fat-faced is about the same, 3/4 of the effect of having committed a very violent crime or murder. And I don't think even I, as a behavioral scientist, had anticipated that I would not have said these are the features I would look for, fat-faced, nor would I have expected these features to have the magnitudes they have. Let me give a final example in education. This is a project that we have ongoing partly in India as well, which is normally in education, we have a lot of models now that try to do what teachers do. Oh, a student has a question, let's answer the question. But here's something teachers cannot do today and that they struggle with, and all pedagogy struggles with, which is what makes teaching extremely hard, is that you know what you want the student to know, but you have no idea what the student is confused about. Student confusion is something sitting in their head that they struggle to explain. And so I often think of teaching as a student is stuck in a maze. You don't know where they are in the maze. They're trying to get out. All you can tell them is what the exit looks like. And it is up to them to wind their way through the maze looking for the exit. And it is hard as a teacher because not only do I not know where they are, I don't know what the maze looks like. And that's because I don't know the kinds of confusion that a student can have. Now, imagine we could build a model that could learn this map. Well, now we'd have a pedagogical insight that nobody has. And that's what we're doing. And how are we building that? Well, we're building it by getting the raw data on how students are thinking, on the steps they're taking. By doing that, you can actually start to learn and induct up what are the kinds of confusion that are present. In fact, the data has already revealed quite some surprising insights for me. These are large sets of practice problems where students take many steps in algebra. And what you find is that these practice problems are hard for these kids. They get about less than 25% right in the answers. But in fact, even when they're getting it wrong, 80% of the steps are correct. So when a student is told most of the time that they got it wrong, it's actually hard for them to learn through a practice problem. Well, what did I get wrong? Because actually most of the things they did were right. And in fact, the model built on this is revealing consistent, repeatable patterns of confusions that we can identify in students that we never knew, no teacher knew, was a kind of confusion that students had. And having identified those confusions that were hidden and common, you can now directly target those and speed up teaching quite a bit. You can focus practice, you can focus explanations. Our view is we might be able to cut learning by time by a factor of 3 or 4 or even greater. So let me conclude by saying those illustrate what I mean by the difference between AI that can do what even the smartest people cannot. As I said, there are capabilities differences. There's differences in how it is built. It's trained on ignorance rather than training on knowledge. There's differences in impacts. As you can see, and Prabhakar mentioned at the beginning, when we train and build algorithms that do what people can, inevitably it raises questions of job loss because you're going to substitute people. When you decide to build algorithms that do what people cannot, there's no question that this is going to be complementary and there's job gain. Nobody looked at AlphaFold and say, oh boy, this is bad for biologists. People looked at AlphaFold and said, this is great for biologists because biology and biologists are becoming more capable. Finally, there's a few other impact questions that change. As I mentioned earlier, we spend so much time getting the last bit out, and we end up with these huge, large models that are a big energy sink. On the right, every single model I built is tiny. In fact, AlphaFold now, there are open versions of it that the biology community has put together that can run on your laptop. And every model I presented can easily run on your laptop. This is not some massive model. And that's because we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're trying to uncover pieces of ignorance. On the left, we're expropriating creators. On the right, we're actually expanding what we know. These are all medium run impacts. In the long run, I actually think the left is a losing proposition. If you look over the large history of economic growth, it's actually quite striking. This is a figure I pulled off the web. There has been this exponential growth, and economists who have studied it are consistent as to what drives this consistent year-on-year growth. It is always and in every place innovation. And on the left, the kind of things that we innovate simply save dollars. I think most economists are in large agreement that that will increase GDP possibly, or certainly profits in the short run. But that innovation is not going to fuel long-run growth. It is by expanding the frontier of what we can do that we fuel economic growth. So I hope you see that, from my perspective, it's a no-brainer to work on the right. And let me conclude with, as I said, mental models. Let me conclude with the mental model of the right. In the March 1973 issue of Scientific American, there was a curious figure. It was an infographic about animal locomotion. It tried to articulate how many kilocalories does it take each animal to go a kilometer per kilogram. Here's the figure, actually. You can see it. Body weight is on the x-axis. Y-axis is cost of transport, kilocalories per gram per kilometer. And you'll notice at the top, mice, very inefficient for all their scurrying around. They just use a lot of calories. The most, somewhere in the middle, people. And the most efficient animal on this figure is salmon. You probably have some ideas why. It's gliding through water, but that's the most efficient. Why am I telling you this? Because in this figure, there is an outlier, something that is, strictly speaking, not an animal. It is here. You can see it. The single most efficient thing on this figure by a wide margin is man on a bicycle. It's kind of evocative that a human invention allows humans to be more efficient biomechanically. The technologists who noticed this made a beautiful observation. They said, this is what computers should be, bicycles for the mind. And I think that's an amazing metaphor, bicycles for the mind. Contrast that with the other metaphor, replacements for the mind. So when we're sitting in 2026 and asking, what is the future of work? What is the future of society? I want us to just reflect that this is the wrong question. People have mentioned several times asking the right question. I think this is the wrong question, and it's the wrong question because we're being asked to predict. This is not a prediction problem. This is a choice. We get to choose which of these futures we would like by deciding what kind of technology we think we want. And these are two very different futures. And as I said, we get to choose. And when I say we get to choose, this brings me back to the beginning. It is very, very, very hard to choose when you have the wrong mental model. And I think what I love about what Prabhakar has done and set up and in framing all of this is he's forcing us to have the right mental model. And to me, I think that is the biggest opportunity in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sendel, for an enlightening lecture today. Now the floor is open for the Q&A session.
It was a brilliant lecture. I was really on the tip of my seat. So I had a question. I also went through your endeavor in IDS 42, where you probably have successfully scaled human, not just itself. And you also spoke vividly about the left and right word models. But in your experience, do you think digital twins for consumer segments are plausible for any testing? Can LLM-enabled human behavior simulation be plausible? And what would be the hassles and drawbacks that you might see?
Oh, great question. So I think that I like one big part of your question, which is take digital simulation either of people or of the body. I think the idea that we can use algorithms to enhance the discoveries we make about the human mind or the human body is fantastically the right idea. Because if you look at the fields like medicine and economics and psychology, I don't think anyone would say that we're very well endowed with so much understanding. In fact, I think people would say there's a lot we don't understand. So the expansion of that knowledge is fantastic. Now, do I think that LLMs are going to do that? I don't think they're going to do that. Because, or if they do, it's very minimal. And the reason for that is, I think that the power of things like AlphaFold is that we built tools for a purpose. I think currently what's happening is people are trying to take the easy way out. Oh, I've got a Gemini or Claude, let me just take it and throw it at it. That is just the easy way out. One reason I'm really excited about this is that I think people like you and the young students at IIT Madras have a chance to just start working on fantastically new and interesting things. And I think the future is going to be people picking interesting, hard problems in areas like you just said, medicine, psychology, economics, and trying to build algorithms that move things forward in a material way. And we have everything we need to do that. You can build a convolutional network, you can build a transformer, you can do all of that. All of that training is doable, and that data is gettable. So I think there's just a fantastic opportunity to sort of not take the easiest path, which is prompting an LLM, but actually start building and moving things forward.
The reason I asked was I currently run a startup which kind of, does automated A/B testing, but simulating human behavior. And I definitely know that LLM prompts can never behave like a human and simulate a human decision. But what I want to ask, because I've been going through your work to help my pilot as well. So what would as you mentioned, you wanted to map a maze of human learning that helps teaching as well, which is very intriguing. What factors would you majorly take into account when you are probably simulating human decision making, let's say when you're given a bunch of products and its competitors?
Yeah, I think the way I would approach it is in each of these projects, the key was to collect or access ground truth data. So in the AlphaFold example, the thing that really allowed AlphaFold is the hard work of biologists to say, for this protein, here's the measured structure. That data set unlocked everything. In the cardiology example I gave, the data set that unlocked everything was, here are some people, some of them went on to die of cardiac death. So I think a good formula for all of these things is to say, what is the ground truth behavior or outcome that I'm trying to actually make sense of, and how do I get some data on that? And because we understand that so poorly, a model that has even modest predictive power is super enlightening, because our current predictive power is very low. So I think I would start by saying, what is the behavior and how do I get some data on that ground truth behavior, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. It was a really insightful lecture, and I am privileged to have had the opportunity to attend it, sir. And my question is related to something one of the inaugural speakers mentioned in their addresses about AI fuel delusions. What, as a behavioral economist and AI researcher, how dangerous do you think it is that many times we do not know how AI comes to the decisions it does? I feel in some respects AI is a black box in which we feed it data and it gives us predictions and results. How dangerous do you think it is that, especially in the case of AI fuel delusions, that we do not know exactly how and why AI does what it does?
Oh, fantastic. It's a great question. Let me turn it back on you. So I think, well, first of all, it's a privilege for me to present here because I feel like the students at IIT Madras are I believe the students truly are the people who are going to solve this problem, and students like you are definitely going to solve this problem, I promise you. And I think the way you solve this problem is just by going back and just remembering you guys can build stuff. And we don't have to be feeling powerless. Sure, maybe we can't access the innards of what's going on in ChatGPT, but we can build wrappers around ChatGPT. We can build products that say, hey, this is a thing that sits by you and actually comments on what ChatGPT does. You can build, and that is very simple to build wrappers around these products. So in some sense, I think AI delusion is dangerous. I actually think there's quite a few problems like AI delusion. I think that when I see people working with LLMs, I notice that there's sort of a degradation of thought quality. You become just a little bit more passive and you're not thinking as hard. When students read an explanation, all of this is a problem, but we don't need to feel like the only solution is somebody working at this big company needs to do something. It is doable now, especially in the days of Claude Code, to go and build your own wrapper and say, hey, I have this thing. If you access ChatGPT through me, I can tell you, you actually won't suffer from delusions. And I think there's enough demand for people for things like that, that I would encourage you to find a passion to go and build things like that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for a great session. Very much inspiring to connect, the dots between psychology, economics, and IT. My question here is, at what point we will create a line of difference in terms of social cohesion and then economic behavior and leverage IT, considering, the scarcity of labor in all aspects of knowledge base? As we are highly IT based, or I would rather put it in the way generative AI based.
And you're asking how we as a society can do that?
As
I think
experts.
as experts, I think for me, Prabhakar mentioned this briefly in his talk, and I think a big part of this is going to be a kind of reskilling. And let me use a computer science metaphor that I really like. When you have a big code base, at some point, you realize you have to refactorize the code base, that the current modular structure is not working. And I think it's pretty clear the current modular structure of academia is not working. The groupings and the departments and the disciplines don't really make sense at this point. And so I think the most important thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create bilingual people who are equally native in several things. And once we have enough of those people, we'll realize that's not bilingual. That should be the one thing, and we'll get refactorized. And it's happened in the past. When math became very big, you needed people in a variety of disciplines to suddenly know math. And that became central to that. So this is not unusual, but it is rare in the history of academia. And I think the biggest thing we need at this point is this sort of bilingualism. And I'm looking forward to places like IIT Madras promoting that bilingualism.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Dr. Sandil. This is Bala here, co-founder of a edtech startup from IIT Madras Incubation. So my question is, there are two parts. One is, I really loved the way you mentioned that the solution should be to focus on problems what people can't solve than just riding on the wave, right? But I strongly feel that that also comes on the mind shift of the, I would say, the current people who are trying to just utilize this AI wave and try to just cut short the way you said that longer gains with the shorter gains, right? Right now, everyone is trying to ride on the wave to cut short and to reduce it. But how do you think that we can inculcate this kind of research mindset of working on the harder problems to fuel the larger growths than the shorter one? So this is the first one. Second is, I saw your solution on the edtech space, which we are showing on the 3 examples, right? Just want to also to look at, is there a way to leverage those outcomes into an existing solution, or to see how best we can work on those parts? Thank you so much.
Let me go. I think that for the first one, I have a fairly easy answer, which is, in my experience, there's always a set of very ambitious students and young people who are looking for interesting, hard things to do. And what they need primarily, is role models. They need to see people who have done things so they can be like, oh, I could do something like that too. And I think one doesn't need top-down inculcation so much as creation of bottom-up examples that will inspire people. And I think people like you who are doing things, going out there and building things, doing projects, doing research projects, building startups, building companies, building nonprofits, I think have a moral responsibility beyond the thing that you're building to realize you're a role model for a bunch of other people. And so the choices you make are not simply choices about your own company and what's best in the very short run. But at this time, I think people who are out there doing the innovative things need to push themselves even further so they can kind of be a good role model for everyone else.
Thank you so much. For the second one, any thoughts?
I think very much so. I think that the way to build a sort of model of confusion, the way we're trying to do it, is to set it up so that it can have an API that then can be integrated into all these other edtech projects. I completely
Thank you so
agree.
much. Yeah. I've been following your work for the last 6 years, from the Infosys Prize onwards. So glad to see you today.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for your session. It was really insightful. I have a question which is rather philosophical. So, do you, like Marx talked about alienation. And I strongly feel that with the AI, it's not the working class that is going to, bring out a revolution and end alienation. It's going to be the AI. AI is going to do a lot of objective things that for the humans, the only possible thing that you can do is bring out your individuality. That is the only way you can survive AI. I don't see it as a monster, rather, So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think you are touching on a theme that also was touched on earlier, which is that these technologies are not neutral with respect to the human mind. I think they have massive changes in both society and in how people think and feel and they live. And I think Marx is a good analogy. I think Marx was responding to the massive influence of manufacturing and how it was changing society. I think Kafka is another example. I don't know if you've read Kafka, but Kafka is fundamentally a response, I think, to the growing creep of bureaucracy. That's why all his stories are about not understanding what is happening to you. And I think you're also right that this is a time when people are starting to feel something like this. And I think the only thing I would add to what you're saying is I would just reiterate my point that it's easy to feel powerless, as if all of these things are happening to us. And I think, to me, that is probably the most, I know that everyone says, oh my God, it's such an amazing time. But I also know that a lot of people, many, many people, feel powerless. And I think it runs deeper than this issue of, I think alienation is part of it, but I think it runs deeper. And I think it's because these big changes seem to be happening to us, and it's not choices that we make. And that's the root problem I would try to attack. I think I would just, by just starting with yourself and starting with everyone in this room, realize, no, these are not things that are happening to us. They are things that we can influence. I would not take it as given that AI is going to do anything. It's not an alien that has taken over the planet. It is a set of human choices being made, starting with everyone like you, starting with people like Prabhakar. It's a set of choices that are being made that are going to result in a set of outcomes. And I think the minute that we give in to the idea that X is going to happen, we've fundamentally given up our agency. It is the things we do that dictate what will happen. And so I think we should seriously consider the kind of outcomes you're describing, but I don't think I think the worst thing we can do is to treat them as a given. I think if they happen, it's because we chose that they happen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Professor Sendel, for joining us online today. As we come to the close of this evening, I now invite Ms. Shweta Bhupati, Senior Manager, Alumni Relations, Office of Institutional Advancement, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Dear esteemed guests, faculty members, alumni, and students, a very good evening. On behalf of the Office of Institutional Advancement, IIT Madras, it is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks for this special occasion, the inauguration of the Srilatha and Prabhakar Raghavan Center for Information and Society. A heartfelt thanks to Dr. Prabhakar Raghavan and Mrs. Srilatha Raghavan for their generosity and visionary support in establishing this center. We extend our sincere thanks to Mr. S. Krishnan for his special address highlighting the significance of this center. We would like to thank Professor Ashwin Mahalingam and Mr. Kaviraj Nair for their continued support and guidance. We would like to thank Professor Ravindran, Professor Matangi Krishnamurthy for their insightful overview of the center and its vision. We are honored to have Professor Sendil Mullainathan join us today and thank him for this distinguished lecture and engaging interaction. We thank all our esteemed guests, alumni, faculty members, and well-wishers for being part of this memorable occasion. A special note of appreciation for everyone who worked to make this event seamless and meaningful. Thank you all once again. Good evening.
Thank you, Shweta. I request everyone to kindly rise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Thank you everyone for joining us and gracing this occasion. Have a pleasant rest of the day. Thank you.